because what people don't understand is you could have a company that you own 90% economically, but actually you could have control of 10%. So control, because that's about voting rights, right? So there's a difference between, voting power and economic power. So I can structure, believe me, I could structure a company where I can give you 90% of that economically of that company and take all the voting control from you. And what does that mean? I can sell it without you even know it. Welcome to the Spiritual Injection, and let's celebrate the wonderful introduction that Sister Sylvina gives to us every week. She's been such a consistent co-host of this great program, and without her help and without her consistency, I can honestly say we wouldn't be here today. So today is going to be a very special spiritual injection. As you can see, I have our special guest in the lab with me, and we're going to have a very in-depth discussion on structuring of businesses, because I am of the mind, and those of you who know me, you know how strong I am on us fulfilling or working towards concretizing what we espouse. Because one of the things that we are good at doing is speaking as a people, right? We have to learn how to structure what we say, what we desire, okay?
Absolutely.
So
yes,
today
sir.
is about structuring. It's about how to move from just the thought, just the idea, just the vision, the dream, to actually structuring our thoughts, structuring our desires, structuring our dreams, structuring our visions, and bringing those ideas into concrete reality. So we're going to look at what the best ways are to achieve that. So it gives me special, it's a very great honor and a privilege, first and foremost, for me to introduce the man sitting to my right, your left, Mr. Everton Robertson. Please receive him with a big rapturous round of applause. Hey.
Welcome, Brother Everton.
Welcome, Brother Everton. Thank you, sir.
Bonjour.
Great to see you.
Thank you so much, all. Listen, first of all, can I thank Spiritual Injection for affording me the audience and the right to speak to you. It's my privilege and my honor. And I'd like to obviously also thank all those who've tuned in, because I know your time is valuable. But I hope that there's something of value we can equally impart to you. So I really, the purpose of me being here was to try and share some of the experiences I've had as an offshore lawyer and an onshore lawyer for some time, doing structured finance and structured deals. I know it's a little bit difficult to talk, because obviously I think a lot of you guys will be landing at a different place in your journey, whether you're here just to as first timers to get some experience on doing deals, whether you're thinking about doing your own business, whether you're an angel investor stage, seed, series financing, pre-IPO or IPO. I think one thing I would like to leave with you, it really doesn't matter what stage you're at in that journey of doing business, the way you should be structuring and the way you should be thinking, whether it's from inception or to initial public offering, actually the structure will be the same, and it should be the same. Because in the beginning it should be aspirational, right? And if it's aspirational in the beginning and you structure it as if you were looking at the end, then throughout your journey, you probably won't need to change that structure. And therefore, there's less problems with dealing with that. That said, what I'd just like to do is to kind of share with you and walk you through a little bit of my journey, which kind of gives you a sense of where my landing point is here. I kicked off my journey at law school. I studied law at University College London, and managed to get a training contract at one of the Magic Circle, which is one of the leading firms in London, doing finance work. I was at Linklaters, did my training there, and basically I was what's known as a capital markets lawyer. what a capital markets lawyer is someone who writes paper and structures bond issues or structured finance deals. And the interesting thing about those deals is that they're all pretty much structured what's known as off the balance sheet of a financial institution, but they use structuring, which is offshore structuring. The world of capital markets is basically bond issues, debt, and equity financing. And these deals are structured where a company wants to raise debt. I mean, it could be a large or small company. They're looking to raise finance to basically, if you're a potential investor, for you to invest in that product. But again, typically they'll be structured with an offshore perspective to them. After my time at Linklaters, I moved on to a couple of US firms, White and Case, and now known as Allen Overy and Sherman's, and carried on with the progression of doing capital market structured finance work and eventually doing IPOs. Back in those days, I did IPOs for Vodafone and Orange, for those who've got a long enough memory. But again, those deals, they're not to those who aren't familiar with that kind of world. They are structured typically, as I said, in a very unique way because they try to take advantage of all sorts of unique aspects of the structuring, whether it's tax, regulatory, etc. So that's where my familiarity on the UK kind of structuring perspective kind of started. I then kind of moved on from the UK and moved to Hong Kong and did real offshore work. I worked for and have been working for a long time prior to my retirement last year for a large offshore firm, the largest one, Maples Group. And that was doing Cayman Islands and BVI, British Virgin Islands structures. Now, John Grisham with the firm has given the BVI and Cayman a very bad name, an undeserved bad name. So when you hear of those jurisdictions, don't think money laundering and all sort of negativity. Actually, most of the leading financial institutions globally will structure their deals using some form of offshore, and a lot of them will use Cayman and BVI. So we'll come on to why you would use those jurisdictions or similar jurisdictions in a moment. But just safe to say, for those that don't know, the Cayman Islands and the British Virgin Islands are dependent territories of the UK. In other words, one of the advantages of using structures using those jurisdictions is that it's very similar to UK law. The common law of the Cayman Islands and British Virgin Islands is very similar to the UK law. So there's that familiarity. And of course, the biggest kind of draw for it is a light touch regulatory regime, and there's no tax at the corporate level. Now, I know most of you may well be thinking, well, I mean, what's this got to do with my general kind of way of thinking in respect of corporate structures? The reason why it's important is, for me, we can all, once we've learned from best in class, then we can adapt that best in class to our normal approach to any structure. And to be honest with you, the offshore structuring is the best in class. And therefore, that's why I kind of mention it, because eventually, if you're aspirational, that's where you should be looking to be. So when I was in whilst being in Asia, what I've been focusing on most recently is transaction out of the PRC, the People's Republic of China, and out of China generally and Southeast Asia. And one of the reasons why I'm very keen to talk to the audience is that, when probably a lot of people don't know this, but if you think about all the hot companies in the China space, whether it's an Alibaba or a Baidu or a Xiaomi, these companies are, believe it or not, they're not China companies. When they went IPO, when they went public as Cayman Islands companies. In other words, they weren't structured as domestic China companies, because there are disadvantages to do that. They were structured in a way that attracted investors globally. So what I wanted to do really was, again, use that best in class kind of experience and information and share it with us, because I don't see why that should be the preserve of those who actually are in the know. And it's really trying to share some of those life lessons with you. And just bear in mind one thing, just so that you know, I think the dot-com boom, especially in the China space back in 2008, 2010, with all these sort of dot-com companies, they all started like all those of you who are aspiring to be business people. Believe it or not, these multi-billion companies all started as baby companies, less than $1 million as their first initial seed investment, or as their series financing investment. So they all started from a very kind of low-level space. But the key is that even though they started from that base, actually their structure did not change. So the same structure you found, 15 years ago when this company was established was the same structure, believe it or not, that they took to an IPO. So that's, yeah. So after so obviously doing a lot of deals out of China, I spent some time actually in the Cayman Islands itself. So I spent a couple of years there. And the focus there was more so on US deals. So I did a lot of what's known as collateralized debt obligations. These are instruments that are backed by mortgages. There was a bit of a CDO crash back in the day. But again, all those deals, I'll give you an example. If you ever invest in any form of product, any form of pension fund or whatever, any paper you're investing in is probably structured as an offshore piece of paper. So it's not structured, believe it or not, it's not structured as a domestic structure. One thing I would again point out is, one thing I'm hoping is that I'm not saying something that should be new, because if you look at the US, for example, one of the reasons why the Cayman Islands as a jurisdiction really took off was because it was a competitor to Delaware. So in the US, believe it or not, there's at least 7 states in the US which are what you can call tax efficient or even offshore jurisdictions. So whether it's a Texas, a Florida, a Wyoming, or even a Delaware, these states are becoming more and more attractive to companies because of their light touch regulatory regime, or their zero state sales or income tax. So again, people in the know will not set up a company in New York, for instance, and be subject to New York state tax, but they will find a jurisdiction that is more appealing to them. So for instance, you probably heard about the recent kerfuffle with Tesla and Elon Musk. He's moved his business from a tax efficient state like Delaware because he wasn't happy with the way that state was treating. Basically, they decided to not approve a particular shareholder a recommendation to pay a dividend. He then moved that his business to another state, and that being Texas. The reason why these are important, these examples, is because as potential business owners or business owners, we do need to be cognizant of structuring and efficiencies, because the great and the good are. So in the US, for instance, believe it or not, most companies that are listed are Delaware companies, i.e. doesn't matter where they are carrying on their business in their state is, the actual structure. So therefore you can be carrying on a business in California, which has one of the highest state taxes, or you can be carrying on a business in New York. What you do is structure your business out of that state for tax or regulatory efficiencies. So that's one of the reasons why structuring is very important, because it creates those efficiencies, and the best in class will use those efficiencies to good use. Perhaps I can leave it there, stop there for a moment. I don't want to carry on forever, but I just wanted to lay the land that I think where you are probably now, you're thinking, well, this is way above my pay grade. Why are we kind of thinking about, you know what I mean, a Meta or whatever, but what you or an Alibaba. But the point I'm trying to make is that they were all like you once upon a time, believe it or not. These companies did not become massive companies overnight, because I've acted for those companies from the first inception of an investment they've had up until 10, 15 years later when they went public. And the structure was the same. And we can talk a little bit about why that structuring is important and drill down into that. But just as an overview, don't think because where you are at the moment, you can just kind of do business and wait until you pop, because by then it may well be very difficult to restructure or to do something. I was speaking to someone today, and one of the things that they were saying in respect to structuring was that the way the company was structured was that there was four directors and there were four shareholders. And structurally, if you just leave your structure, for instance, like that, then that could give you problems, right? Why? Because it could create a deadlock in your company where you have an even number. Well, if two fall out with the other two, this could give you a structural problem, right? People do often, I've seen it a million times, fall out. But there's a way to maintain a kind of economical control mechanism within your corporate to address that, right? And unfortunately, people don't think about that in the beginning, or people just say, well, it's just me as the business, let me just do that. And it's just, I don't need to have any structure. I'm just an individual. Why do I need this expense and burden of doing so? But again, if you're thinking about structuring, well, typically you can't sell yourself, right? Or and therefore you need to be, typically you don't want to contract in your own name, because again, there are issues with that, because you're exposing yourself to personal liability if you're structuring as an individual rather than a limited liability corporate. So yeah, I just wanted to lay that line and give you a kind of general feel for
okay, great. Well, what I want to ask you as the first thing that comes to mind, three things. There may be those in the audience who are thinking, man, that's too much information. Do I need to go to a university just to study how to go into business in the first instance? So what would you say in regards to someone listening right now and just becoming afraid based upon what you just said?
Yeah.
So the vibe is, let me just stay in my corner, because what he's saying sounds very complicated and it's going to take a lot of research.
Yeah. Well, my first point is, well, you're going into business in the first place. There's risk there, right? And I think it's not really so much about complications. It really is, the point of this discussion is to get people thinking and engaged, right? And too often, I'm sure people will say, well, look, actually, I didn't read that agreement. I didn't actually register that IP. I didn't actually have a non-disclosure agreement when I was negotiating with someone, and they've stolen all my confidentiality. So it's really, of course, it's incremental. I get that. And I've been doing this for over 30 years, so I've probably spilled my guts out for 50 minutes of 30 years is knowledge. But the point I'm making, I think, is to get engaged, because whether it's how you structure for tax efficiency, for control efficiency, for going forward in restructuring, or for a sale, whatever it is, it's really just to be engaged. And if you're running a business and you're signing contracts and you're not reading them, or if you're doing any form of you're taking on board investors and you're losing control of the company, whatever it is, if whatever aspect of your business you're doing, The key is to engage, and as you go along, for sure, this can be incremental, and we can kind of try and learn how to deal with that. But the key is to be engaged. As I said, the point of me being on this call is to share best in class, and I really make no apology for that, because as I said, Alibaba was founded by a school teacher called Jack Ma. He was a school teacher. He had been rejected by McDonald's 7 times and Harvard 9. And he had a tiny little dream to have a dot-com company. But one thing he did have the foresight to do was from day one to structure his business in a way that it looked like an IPO business. And that's a school teacher. In other words, that's not a finance guy. That's not anything like that. So safe to say that I think we can, if you really want a compromising discussion, then I shouldn't be here. And you can get that. You can get the discussion that is a lot more differently somewhere else. But I think I'm all about best in class, and I think that's what we should be all about. It's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be a challenge. But if you want to do it right, you've got to do it right.
So what do you think would separate an average person like, at the time, Jack Ma, to an average person, say, living in the United Kingdom or the US? Why would we approach it differently?
So, and that's a great question. And I think what I've learned from in China, doing deals out of Asia and China, is they like to replicate. And actually, they get the best in class. So what happens is that if there is a Jack Ma that has succeeded in growing his business, everybody jumps on the same bandwagon, which is one of the reasons why Cayman and BVI structures are very popular in China. So if you go to China and you say, well, what's the number one offshore jurisdiction? It's going to be the BVI. And that's because my cousin, my uncle, my aunt, my friend, everybody uses them. So because they know it works, right? So if you've got Alibaba, Baidu, Meituan, Kuaishou, Xiaomi, if you've got all the best companies, the largest companies in China, for instance, that are structured with the IPO vehicle, the initial public offering vehicle, is a Cayman structure, and it's got a Hong Kong underneath, and then it's got a China. Everybody's going to do the same because it works. And similarly, in the US, the best in class is Delaware. So whether it's a Meta or whatever, again, if you're going to list in the US, that's the approach, right? I think there's almost there's over 1 million Delaware companies in the US. So these are tried and tested. And again, if you were setting up an investment fund tomorrow, right? Again, Cayman, for instance, is the number one jurisdiction for investment funds. It has over 100,000. And my point is that, let's say, for instance, even if you weren't doing a company, you were deciding, I want to set up a little private equity fund. Well, your aspiration is to be the same as Blackstone, or to be like a CVC or a KKR. These are the best guys. And if you look at their structures, they're not domestic New York companies or whatever. They're a private equity GP/LP structure coming out of Cayman. So for me, it's very simple. We aspire to have great companies, and we aspire to do the very best. So why shouldn't we not aspire to follow the very best and structure it in that way? Why shouldn't that be our aspiration? Because otherwise, to be honest with you, you're going to trip up, or you're actually never going to get there because you're not structured in a way that is appealing to anybody. Because if I were, and we can look at it another way. Let's say, for instance, you went to market, right, and someone was interested in your business. The first thing an investor is going to ask you is, well, what am I investing in? If it's Joe Blogs, well, that doesn't help me. I got no shares in Joe Blogs. I got no rights or recourse against Joe Blogs, whatever. So what they're looking for is a structure that enables them, because remember, it's an economic investment. The structure enables them to exit at some point. Right. So as I said, there's a lot of people I hear all the time, like, oh, Everton, I'm looking for some investors looking really to grow the business. And then you ask them, well, what's your structure? What have you got? And there's nothing there. So, you're going to have problems, I think, attracting investors. Even if you do attract an investor, trust me, the first thing they'll say is, well, we need to restructure you in a way that, number one, enables us to invest in you to get an economic interest, and number two, enables the structure to afford an exit at some point, because these guys are not going to invest for the good of their health. They're looking for some kind of trade sale or some kind of IPO exit.
So do you think it's worth someone going into business if they can just go and work for somebody and earn more money? Because what I'm trying to delineate is, it sounds like there should be a lot of work and a lot of due diligence done up front before we say, I want to own my own business. Because it seems as if many people go into business just to replace their employer. Would you say that's the reason why the aspiration is not over in the West, not the same as those in the East?
No, I don't. I think, to be honest, to be fair to them, I think, to be honest with you, this is a rarefied world. To be perfectly frank, as I've talked to you a little bit about capital markets and writing paper for prospectuses for bond offerings and stuff. This is quite a kind of rarefied world. So you can understand why people are not up to speed with it. I get that. I think where I'm coming from is the desire to get engaged and to understand that, we do need to do it in a way that kind of is best in class. That's kind of my point. And I think also, if I'm your customer, I think what normally happens, it goes hand in hand, doesn't it? If you're structured right, then you're going to deliver something right. Normally, if your books are a bit shoddy, if your corporate structure is a bit shoddy, then that probably kind of feeds into maybe the product too, because obviously the part of the reason for the structuring is, to be brutally frank, economies of scale, right? All these jurisdictions I've mentioned, they have the common denominator is they have zero or very little tax, right? Or if you don't go for zero or very little tax, you might go for a double tax treaty. What that's going to do is help your bottom line, right? If you just structure a company in the UK as a UK company and you're potentially subject to, UK tax, well, that may be a little bit less efficient than doing a Luxembourg or a Jersey or whatever jurisdiction came from, whatever that helps you with those issues, right? So, and as I said, not just that. If you just haven't done your business right, if you haven't entered into an agreement with someone who in respect of your intellectual property, right, then you're going to get ripped off, right? So it's the whole gamut. So I'll give you an example. Let's say, for instance, one of you out there, there's two of you out there are looking to do a business. What's the first thing? And let's say, for instance, you set up a company. What's the first thing you should do? I mean, the first thing you should do, I mean, it's a rhetorical question, but the first thing you should do is have a shareholders agreement. In other words, an agreement between you and your co-founder in respect of how the deal works. What are the economies of scale? Who's going to have, what are the voting rights? Who's going to be a director? These should be documented in the shareholders agreement. And that's very typical. And then that shareholders agreement should be reflected in the company's constitutional documents. So it's for me, it's very basic. It's not even that intellectually high. It's a simple question of how do you document your business relationship. I mean, obviously, as I said, it's going to take different forms, but typically it'll be more than one person that's doing a business. So the question is, well, or the problem is too often, Hakeem, you have a business with your good friend,
right?
And there's this level of trust,
yes,
until there is no trust,
right?
Well, when there's no trust, it's too late,
right?
So most of this stuff needs to be at arm's length, right, to be perfectly frank, because I've seen it too often where that's blown up. So and there's no problem with that. It's a business arrangement. There is no problem with that. Right. We should have no qualms about saying, the proper way, the best in class way of doing it is to document our relationship. So
right. So would you say there's any business that is too small to structure?
No. As I said, I mean, I've seen businesses. There is no business that's too small to structure, because if you think about it, as I said, every business is going to do business. It's going to. So let's say, for instance, I've decided that I'm not. It's just me on my own, right? I've just decided to take a lease on a property, or the most fundamental stuff. I'm going to register my IP, whatever it is, some fundamental aspect of your business. Well, I'm assuming you're not going to do that personally, because if you do it personally, there's personal liability. What most people do would have some kind of corporate structure, because then the liability is limited to that corporate. It's that corporate that is on the hook if there's any issues. So that's as basic as it comes, right? You have a corporation and you structure it whereby, and you have a corporation, and then it's that corporation that enters into contracts on behalf of the company. In other words, it's a real company. So right. I don't see that. I'm very cognizant of cost, right? I mean, nobody's got a blank check. Nobody's got limitless costs, right? Limitless costs. I get that. And what I'm not advocating is for you to get the best white shoe magic circle firms, KPMG, or what. I'm not advocating that, because I understand where people are landing. What I am advocating is for us to have engagement, right? Just start from the very basics. Just engage and think about what it is the company is doing, reading contracts, and seeing whether or not, seeing how you can make the company flourish in a way that eventually takes you to where you want to go.
What's come to mind as you were speaking was, in our community, it was very typical and very regular for our elders to have savings plans known as partners.
Sure.
And this was very,
sure.
Unstructured.
Sure.
So had whoever put that together had a structure in mind, where could those places or businesses be today?
Well, they may have ended up as Blackstone, right? Blackstone is $100 billion private equity fund, because that's all it is. It's just a collection of individuals that have a collective source of funds. And normally, I think, from memory, from that partner relationship, there was an investment manager. There was a guy who skimmed off the top a little bit, right? Well, for Blackstone, they take 2%, and they have an 80-20 split.
It's a different language.
I think so. And my point is that it's best in class. I think that we don't need, as I said, back with my experience in the China space, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. The wheel is fully functional and working, and it's just a question of us tapping into that ecosystem and learning from that. And as I said, what the advocacy is not to say, a business that has very small capital should be spending vast sums of money on advisors, and then the business blows up and it doesn't work. That's not what my advocacy is. My advocacy is baby steps, but be engaged. Let's be engaged. Let's at least be aware of what we're doing. If we choose not to do something, let's choose to do it because we're fully informed of the consequences of not doing something. That's fine.
Right. So those of you listening in the audience, if you have a business or business interest, could you put a 1 in the chat so we can gauge how many individuals who are listening live actually are engaged in some kind of business activity? Now, tell me about this masterclass on Saturday morning. What do you intend to share with the audience, and what would they come away with?
I think in addition to what we talked about, what I'd like to really share is specific examples. So as I said, I'm at the moment, I've got my own firm and we do Cayman Islands and BVI law. And it's basically to put some meat on the bones, to tell you a little bit about, the pros and cons and why people use those structures and what the real benefits are. And as I said, I mean, Cayman and BVI is based on what I know. And to be honest with you, for those who don't know, believe me, it's the best in class. For investment funds, it's the number one jurisdiction. For listings out of Asia, it's the number one. So, and as I said, it has the benefit of being a dependent territory of the UK. I was just there last week, actually. So it's a beautiful island. It's about an hour from Miami. It's about 45 minutes from Jamaica for those who know the area. But as I said, what it was, the reason why it came into being was to basically challenge the North American market and really challenge Delaware. But in respect of what I like to share is, as I said, I mean, just bear in mind, there's no advocacy of a particular jurisdiction. I know Cayman and BVI, but there are other jurisdictions which may be more fit for purpose. Out in Europe, it may well be a Luxembourg structure. You may say, well, why do people use Luxembourg? Well, there's very little tax in Luxembourg, and it's a great entry point into Europe generally. People might like to use Jersey. Again, Jersey has the UK connection. So there's different reasons why people choose different jurisdictions. And as I talked about the US and Delaware and Florida or whatever. But my point is, wherever you land, double tax treaties, believe me, someone lands somewhere. The reason why in Asia, people don't use China structures is because it's 40% tax. Maybe a lot of people who invest in China aren't familiar with the civil law system there. They're not that comfortable relying on Chinese courts. They're not that comfortable relying on a China structure. So what you do is, if you're investing in a structure you're not too familiar with, you want to invest in a structure that is, and therefore that up to the chain, you're investing ultimately, the holding company is something like a Cayman. So there's no advocacy here for any particular structure. It's just really finding one that's fit for purpose, but it probably it may not be your own domestic structure, right? Because depending on where it is, it may have, there may be other structures that have better attributes than the one you have. And as I said, for me, it's all about engagement. It's all about at least turning your mind to these questions and thinking about these questions. Yeah, look, I mean, what part of this is to be available if people want to bounce ideas off me. I'm happy to share that, although I can't say I'm experienced in every jurisdiction and on tax, but I've seen enough structures and seen enough different jurisdictions. The firm I used to work for was, I think, in 6 jurisdictions. They were in Lux, Jersey, Ireland, and as well as Cayman, BVI. So, most people who are familiar with one offshore jurisdiction are very familiar with others too.
Right. So with nearly half of those in the audience having a business, do you think we have IPO potential in the audience? Do you think that's something that we can encourage everybody to try to consider? Now, Silvina, you're in the audience and you're listening to or reading the chat. Is there any questions that you would like to pose on behalf of or directly yourself?
Right. So there's one question I asked us. Does this information apply for non-profits also?
Yeah, so in respect to non-profits, I mean, typically the nature of a non-profit is that there's structures that are already in place, whether it's a foundation, whether it's charitable status. So those structures already exist or should exist to afford those so-called non-profits an avenue to structure themselves, right? You know what I mean? Yeah, so that's really the answer to that. There should be avenues which a non-profit can go down, whether it's a trust, whether it's a foundation, whether it's some kind of charitable kind of structure, which affords non-profits an avenue to go down.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And someone was asking what IPO is, the acronym, but it's already been explained, initial public offering. We have no further questions at this point.
Okay, very good. So I think we're going to have an early night because we've got a big day on Saturday.
One thing, can I just say one? Can I just say one thing? Just to kind of close is that, as I said, I mean, the top end is, you know, the kind of golden buzzer of the IPO or initial public offering or a trade sale or something like that. That's obviously the off the scale top end. But I'm actually we're not even there yet. We're just there in respect of running your business on a day-to-day basis, right? Just having a functioning business, as I said, to ensure there's no room for conflict, to ensure that everybody understands the economics of the deal, because you know, you have different share classes or different voting rights, or you're structured in a way that, you know, it makes sense, and in respect of protecting your IP rights and protecting your kind of your confidentiality rights, whatever it is. This could be just on a day-to-day basis. That structuring is all a part of that, right? It's all about and I think what I would ask anybody who's running a business or thinking about running a business, are these things you're actually thinking about? You know what I mean? You know, if someone taps your shoulder and say, listen, can we talk a little bit about your business, and we like your ideas, would your first instinct be, well, actually, can we sign an NDA first? And then the acronym means a non-disclosure agreement. Can we sign that first? Because I don't want you to steal my stuff. Would that be your level of engagement, or would you just pick up the phone and just spill the beans? I mean, so in respect of, you know, as I said, the scope of discussion, I just don't want people to go away thinking that this is some sort of highfalutin, high-level thing. And I really want people to understand that, you know, from the very beginning, this is the way and this is the language we should be speaking and engaging in.
So how can we help people? Because with what you just said, it's happened to me on several occasions. Like, people run away and they feel this is getting too structured, too constructive, too organized, you know, and people get scared.
Yeah.
So how could you help, or how could we approach people better to make them feel more comfortable when you're introducing them to structures they're not familiar with?
Well, it goes both ways. As I said, I think it goes both ways, because the confidentiality is protecting your confidentiality and me. So typically, I think as I said, I think there's two issues. One is to try and minimize costs, because people are always very worried that this layer of sophistication means money,
right?
And it may or may not, but it's trying to kind of make sure that it's manageable, and we're not saying we're going to incur massive costs to do this. But two is actually to say that the protection goes both ways. I'm trying to look after your interests as well as mine,
right.
And that we want to prevent ourselves being embroiled like Zuckerberg with his Facebook guys in court proceedings because you didn't sort out your business in the beginning. So again, you know, to be honest, I would just push back on that. I mean, if someone is really being very aggressive and say, listen, I don't want anything in writing, then you're probably dealing with a wrong person, to be perfectly frank. I mean, because you may end up not being in a good place at the end of it.
Right. And the ultimate reason for this is protection on what level?
Well, your ultimately it's your business, right? I mean, so you know, as I said, you don't want to lose what's fundamental about your business, which is ownership, intellectual property, all that sort of stuff. Needs to be documented in some shape or form. It needs to be, I mean, ultimately it's your ownership of your business.
Right.
Like, people can lose business if you're not structured in a way that is advantageous to the founders, right?
Right. So how difficult would it be to restructure
restructuring is difficult because normally you need consent. So if you're, as I was saying, if it's two shareholders, four shareholders and four directors, and you know none of them are agreeing, well then it's not going to happen.
Right.
So what the issue with restructuring is, if it's not structured correctly in the beginning, it probably needs consent or a court order, and because otherwise, how else are you going to do it?
Is that like a marriage without a prenuptial agreement?
Something like that. Yeah, exactly.
So restructuring can be very difficult and costly.
Yeah,
so
sure.
it's best to get it right in the first instance.
Sure.
But if you had to do it, is it worth dissolving the company and starting again?
Well, again, as I said, I think, to be honest, it's only on a case-by-case basis. And obviously, we've talked in very general terms here, and therefore we need to drill down on the specific facts. As I said, it may well be that if it requires consent, just like in the marriage example you mentioned, you may have to go to court to get an order to dissolve.
Right.
So yeah, that's the ultimate thing, because if you can't agree, then you're going to end up in a court.
Okay, excellent. Silvina, did you want to add anything? Because we're going to go into the masterclass on Saturday and discuss how those in the audience can actually be a part of it. We have, I think, only a few tickets left.
We only have 26 seats left.
Okay, so those of you in London, I would get my skates on if I was you, because we're going to have a great time on Saturday down at the Hilton Cromwell Road, and we're going to have an intimate session, and we're going to really drill down on what we've discussed today, because I think it's about time that we start to build businesses correctly from inception and really have something of value and quality to pass on to our children. And by way of this, another question, Everton, please. If somebody structures a company, say in the United Kingdom as we're here, how, again, important is it if I want to envisage my business in the Caribbean, in Africa, for instance? How easy will it be to transfer my structure to territories like Africa if I'm structured in the United Kingdom? Or is me being structured in the United Kingdom limiting to me doing business in countries such as Africa and the Caribbean?
Not at all. So obviously structure, can take many forms. So what you could do is simply have the Caribbean business as a subsidiary of something that already exists, right? So there is ownership. So you can set up, again, depending on how you want to do it, you can set up in anywhere in the world and just have the holding company as your UK company if you wanted to. So you can, the point I'm making is you can cut and dice it however you want. It can remain as part of the same group because you're still the share ownership, and then however you want to structure it. So it can remain within a group. It can be a subsidiary. It can be whatever you want. So there is no. I mean, it's very typical for people to have global businesses, right? Have it in different jurisdictions, because where you're landing with that particular jurisdiction maybe is going to be a different structure. Certain jurisdictions say you can only have a domestic company. You can't. So, for instance, if you went to Dubai or Abu Dhabi, if you come into that country doing business, you're supposed to come into that country with a domestic company, for instance. But that doesn't mean to say the shareholders of that entity can't be foreign shareholders. So again, It's going to be horses for courses, but ultimately, because what you're getting at is control. So you can still maintain that control, but actually, you still have to comply with whatever jurisdictional or structural. And it may well be that certain structures don't lend themselves to offshore. It may well be there's a double tax treaty you can benefit from, right? Let's say, for instance, it's India or somewhere like that. They have a treaty with Mauritius. So Mauritius is also offshore. So again, it's really horses for courses and what is fit for purpose in that particular jurisdiction. One thing I would like to say is, as I said, I think we as people get very intimidated by language and by knowledge which we don't know, and I would entreat everybody not to. I mean, I started 30 years ago from a place that I didn't understand all this stuff, and I would entreat people not to get intimidated or worried. Dumb questions are the best questions, and you know what I mean. That part of the sharing is to kind of make people aware of stuff which they're not aware of, and really to kind of help navigate. And it's going to be the case. I'm sure if we had a surgeon on the call speaking about body parts which I didn't understand, I'd feel just as insecure and kind of worried. But I'd ask the question. You know what I mean? What does that mean? Or technical terms. So it's all about learning and growing. And I really encourage people not to be intimidated by all this. Let's dive in the deep end and see if we can kind of get to grips with it.
Any of you want to dive into the deep end? Put a 0 in the chat. or give our special guest a big round of applause if you're ready to dive into the deep end, if you've been inspired. Take your devices off of mute and let him know whether you've been inspired or not.
Thank you so much.
Great information. Yes, sir.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Thank you.
No more.
That was great.
So, Silvina, why don't you tell us how we can be a part of the masterclass on Saturday?
Right, so the link has been posted into the chat. I will repost it shortly. Simply click on the link. You can have an option if you're outside of the UK. The option that suits you is also accessible on the link. It takes 4 to 5 minutes at maximum, depending on whether you have your card to hand. To register, you'll get the link sent directly to your device if you are booking to attend electronically due to being overseas. For those of us in the UK, the same applies. Once you register, we'll have your details and we'll be ready to greet you. The doors open at 11 o'clock for a 12 o'clock start. Want to be prompt. We've chosen a very comfortable venue for us to, spend the day. As our special guest Everton just said, come with questions in hand, ask your questions. And I think one of the encouraging things that you said, Everton, today is just to engage. So we're not thinking about limitations or how far we are away from whatever, aspiration these white-collar companies already achieved. We're just engaging. And once you're engaging, you're opening up yourself, opening up your mindset to actually get step by step closer to being in the space where you can envision yourself aspiring to achieve these things. So come along and engage, whether you're going to bring someone, whether you're going to bring someone with you, or you're going to be the person to come and get the information firsthand that you may share with others. It is very important to engage. Another important thing that was mentioned was, we're not sure as to how long the ability to structure will stay as accessible as it is. And sometimes when these things are said, there's nothing in the air, but, a few years down the line, we think back to the conversation and think, right, okay, he must have known something. So when he said that, my thought was, okay, never thought of it that way, but I would definitely like to be on the right side of the curve. So that's all. We'll see you at Doubletree by Hilton in London, Kensington this Saturday. And I look forward to seeing you there.
Excellent. If we could take down the flyer and post it in the chat. I think it's very important, those of you in the listening audience, that particularly if you're in the UK and if you're not, Saturday morning will be, or early afternoon, our time, will be a great time for you to sit down with your family, sit down with friends and associates, those who you may already be in business with and those who you intend to go into business with, so that you can, learn this language, which is necessary for what you want to get involved in. It does benefit us to learn a few words if we're going into an Arabic speaking country. It definitely will put you in good stead if you learn how to just say good morning. If we're going into an Asian country, put you in good stead to be able to say good morning. Yeah, good night. Even if you go in the Caribbean, people say good night and I was wondering, what are you talking about? It's only 7 o'clock. Good night. But it's a language that you can't go over there and say, well, good evening. No, you do as those in the Caribbean do, right? So that you can build affinity. So all of that to say, as we're going into a space that we all need to be a part of this great space, then I would advise all of us to bring a family member, bring a colleague, and bring somebody who we hold dear.
I was just going to say, Hakeem, so if you're ever in China, if you want to say hello to someone, it's just ni hao. And if you ever want to say thank you, it's shishi ni hao. And if you ever want to kind of, you're doing a presentation, you say, Dodger Hot.
I could do that one. Dodger.
Dodger means welcome, everybody. It's nice to
There
meet
you go.
And yeah, so yeah, you're quite right. Sorry. and to apologize as I did is boys, I'm very sorry. Boys.
So let's have a wonderful weekend. This is going to be very special. He's flown all the way from Asia to be here and was in the Cayman Island also. And whilst going back home, passing through London, I wanted to do this for those of us, particularly living in the UK, to be in person. So we're going to be in person on Saturday. And those of you who are around the world, you also will have the privilege of being not a fly on the wall, an inquisitive mind who will have access to all of the information those of us in the room will have access to. So jump on board, go online. There's only 20, I think you said, Sylvia.
26 at the last count.
Yeah, and we've got restrictions on the numbers inside the room because we wanted to ensure that it was a boardroom setting, fit for those who just want to come and learn. So please come and, as they say, fill your boots with information how to get this done, because the best ideas, like sometimes you watch Dragon's Den, right? And when you're watching Dragon's Den, and when we look at Dragon's Den, you've got individuals with all the good ideas, and then the dragons, the dragons are those who have the structure in it. Would I be right to say that?
Yeah, it would. And what they normally, forgive me for using inappropriate language, but what they may end up doing is, if you don't understand the structure, is screwing you, right?
Right.
If they'll know, how to best structure their investment in you to leverage the best they can, because otherwise, why would they be doing that? So, and again, if you're not cognizant of the structuring, whether or not it's the economics, whether it's the control, then you could be at a disadvantage, because what people don't understand is you could have a company that you own 90% economically, but actually you could have control of 10%. So control, because that's about voting rights, right? So there's a difference between voting power and economic power. So I can structure, believe me, I could structure a company where I can give you 90% of that, economically, of that company, and take all the voting control from you. And what does that mean? I can sell it without you even know it. So yeah, it
sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah, so a lot of these structures, it's about that. It's about, as I said, I mentioned before about having an equal number of shares, an equal number of directors. There, as I said, there are structuring ways of dealing with that, and they're not difficult, and people do it every day. But as I said, if you're very passive and you don't and you haven't fixed your structure to sort that out, well, if there is a falling out, and it may well be, then you're in deadlock and that company's going nowhere.
So most of those on Dragon's Den, if they knew what we're speaking about, would they still go on Dragon's Den?
And they probably would. They'll do a deal, but just not as good a deal.
Right.
Yeah, you do have to. As I said, I think for me, one of the biggest things is that we're not reading contracts. That really hurts me. It hurts me a lot when people tell me, well, I just signed. Whatever it was they pushed in front of me, I just signed. That really does pain me, because we can all read and write. And I just think that let's engage. I mean, let's not get have the wool pulled over our eyes anymore. Let's engage. Don't let inertia rule your decision-making process. Let's just engage. Yeah, at whatever level. You could take 1% of what I said away. That's fine. If all you say next time is, before I have a conversation with you about giving my products away, I want to sign an NDA, that's enough. Because there's small things like that you should be doing.
Fantastic. And we've got one of our presenters on Saturday on the line, our great entrepreneurial coach, Asari. Warm welcome to the Spiritual Injection, Asari.
Greetings, everyone.
Greetings.
Greetings, big brother.
How art thou?
I'm very good, very good. Just listening to everything, taking my notes. So very good.
Well, we're looking forward to hearing you on Saturday. Tell us what you've been up to.
Yeah, so well, actually, I forgot to mention it actually when we spoke, but I won an award.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. Spiritual injection. Let's honor our own.
Well done.
Congratulations.
I won an award for the Executive Coach 2025 for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So that was pretty cool.
Oh, sorry.
Fantastic.
Big things.
That's huge.
Yeah. So we look
Excellent. I
forward
saw
to
it on
hearing.
Facebook. So well done, brother.
Thank you.
We look
Yeah.
forward to hearing more on Saturday. And I
Absolutely.
know, obviously, the reason why you got that award was for the boost that we gave you last time you got spiritual injection.
Of course.
That's right.
So I hope in your acceptance speech, you said, I want to give thanks to those at spiritual injection.
Good.
Very
That's
good.
right.
Tell us what you've been doing in Africa real quick, Asari.
Yeah, well, I had the fortune to be back in Rwanda last year in September. So I went on a trade mission organized by a sister who's Rwandan, and she lives here, but she has a coffee farm. So we went to see the coffee farm. We went to meet a lot of different people. We even had dinner at the embassy, the British embassy's, what do you call it? The ambassador's residence.
Right.
So that was pretty good. But yeah, we just looked at different opportunities going on in Rwanda. And then fortunately, I was also, because my wife does events, she had an event in South Africa. So I've never been to South Africa. So I spent 3 weeks there as well. And that was a very interesting place. But I didn't get to meet particularly business people other than the people that were at the event. But a very interesting experience. So yeah, I've been fortunate to done a little bit more traveling and learning about different opportunities.
Would have been good if you could have briefed the premier so that he didn't get ambushed the way he did yesterday at the Oval Office.
He must have known, but he's not one of those. He's not the right kind of brother that we
Very
need
good.
right now.
So tell me, in regards to what we've been discussing today and your travels and your journeys, have you seen the need for what we've been discussing and what we will discuss on Saturday?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting because when people set up a business, interesting what Everton was saying, people don't necessarily know where it's going. And sometimes you set something up not knowing that the future could put you internationally, open up opportunities in other territories and other situations where, pardon me, you haven't structured it to take advantage of those things, investment and other things. So I'm really listening to that, thinking that there are great opportunities because, there's people out there saying we must think bigger. We tend to think, you get one person that might think Tottenham is big enough if I can have a barbershop in Tottenham. Another person's thinking, I want to take the world over. I'm going to go to the whole of Europe, the whole of America, China, and take the world. So there's so much space for global business. And now you could even do it from your living room, from your bedroom, from your office. You don't even have to move. So I think there's never been an easier time to do business internationally.
Do you enjoy our content? Well, make sure to like, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you won't miss an episode.